Great. So just to begin, I'm just going to ask all the speakers to introduce themselves. So it'd be great to hear a little bit about who you are as people outside of your work, because you're all engaged in a lot of really interesting and amazing things. A brief introduction to your organization that you're representing today and a bit about that work. So why don't we start with you, Ines?
Thanks so much, Sabrina. Hi, everyone. Wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for having me today. My name is Ines Ixiera, and I'm coming to you from unceded Lisjan Ohlone territory, also known as Oakland, California. And unceded territory means it was never given up, it was stolen, and the people whose land it is are still here. And Sogorea is lucky enough that we work with that tribe, the Confederated Villages of Lisjan, and always try and recognize that when starting a space of whose land we're on, and not just recognize it as an acknowledgement, but as like an active part of the space that we're creating together, calling those folks in. So I'm an artist, organizer, activist, and educator. I've been living in Oakland almost 20 years, which is kind of wild. And I grew up part of my life in Bolivia in South America in an evangelical mission in the Amazon. So it was called America, Little America. And so my life is very much informed by a mixed indigenous experience of like neocolonialism, of what it's like, very informed by structures of power and racism, patriarchy, and I'm an artist, and I do the media and visual representations here for Sogorea, some of the organizing and events and political education projects. And so Sogorea is Urban Indigenous Women-Led Land Trust here in Oakland. We're officially about 2 years old, but we're built on the work of Karina Gould and Janella LaRose, who are lifelong grassroots sacred sites activists here in the Bay Area. And about 25 years ago, they started walking to all the burial sites of the Ohlone people and trying to raise awareness about their existence, trying to save those sites. And that work led to the founding of Sogorea. We are about 15 people now, and we're doing urban gardens, you know, educational, cultural revitalization work, language revitalization, food justice, land justice, and trying to return land to Indigenous people here in Oakland. So thanks so much for including me in this conversation.
Thank you for being here. We're super excited to have you. Kathy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, I am Kathy Masaoka, and I am representing today the Nikkei Progressives, but I'm actually a longtime member of Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress, NCRR. And I do want to say, first of all, that I don't want to take up as much time, and I want to give more time to both Kenniss and Ines, because I think by rights, really, the information and what they have to share from both the Indigenous and from the African-American experience is really important today. And, you know, we have experiences, but I think, you know, it's secondary. Okay, so I am here in Los Angeles, and I am, you know, on the Tongva land, and yes, we are thinking very carefully about that a lot, because, you know, I work in Little Tokyo, or I've always been in Little Tokyo in terms of seeing that as a place that we want to preserve. But I think more, you know, the last year or so, really understanding that really the land is not our land. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like we fought so hard because we were moved out, right, and removed from land, and we came back to it, that it's sort of like the sense that somehow it belongs to us. But I think we're starting to think a little differently and try to understand what it means. At any rate, you know, I come from a background of growing up in a very multicultural neighborhood called Boa Heights here. And, you know, I feel like that's been the through line in my life, because I was at UC Berkeley in the late 60s, and very, very much influenced by the fight for third world studies and ethnic studies, and, you know, anti-Vietnam War, and coming together with people of color. So it's sort of like that was the foundation that I started with, and all through my work in Little Tokyo, we've always had that sort of understanding. So even in fighting for redress and reparations, we always understood that we had to pay attention, we had to build solidarity, that was always connections with other communities of color, especially South Africa, the anti-apartheid struggle, Hopi Navajo here fighting for their land and against the mines that were contaminating their land. So all of that, and then I was a teacher. So outside of my work in these organizations, which has always been constant, I was a teacher for 30 years in a continuation high school in LAUSD. And I've always worked with youth ever since I returned to LA in the 70s. I've worked with young people and, struggling young people. And I feel like it was really important. And I worked at a place called All People, strangely enough, again, another place where people of color and different backgrounds came together. So for whatever reason, I feel like I've been on this path of and always found environments where people are working together from different communities and in solidarity. And NCRR, the group that fought for a grassroots campaign for redress, started in 1980, and we're still going on. But after 9/11, especially, people rose up to support Muslims, and I think that that's been kind of where I've gravitated towards. I also love to garden. That sort of brings me joy every day. And I think it's necessary for one's health and for one's livelihood. So growing food and doing a little writing and being part of a sustainable environment in Little Tokyo. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Kenniss.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. And Kathy, I'm here because I'm always mesmerized by your contributions and what you have to offer. So walking behind you always gives me pleasure, and it's an inspiration to finally be on a panel with you. I represent the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. It is the premier grassroots coalition who has been out in the out there, if you will, advocating and pushing for reparations for well over 3 decades. And we were with the Honorable Congressman John Conyers when he first introduced HR 40, and every session thereafter when he introduced it, we went out and we tried to get the support necessary to pass HR 40. And of course, when Congressman Conyers retired, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee stepped in to continue that advocacy and the lobbying for passage of HR 40. We, of course, felt the calling, and we continue to be on the forefront of those groups pushing for passage of HR 40. 4 years ago, we actually were able to successfully get Senator Booker to introduce the companion bill to HR 40. The first time he introduced it, it was S-1083, and we began to lobby for him to try to get the number 40. He was able to get it, so we have HR 40 on the House side, S-40 on the Senate side. There has been much groundswell behind HR 40. When I first came to NCOBRA about 5 years ago, the highest number of co-sponsors at that time had been about 45 co-sponsors. Today, we have 193 co-sponsors for HR 40. We have 22 for S40. And on the HR 40 side, as you know, there are those the elected officials who are never going to put their name out as being supportive of certain pieces of legislation. We have 8 committed voice votes if we can get HR 40 to the floor for a floor vote and debate. So we have about 203 elected officials in the House who have said that they support HR 40. Unfortunately, what we find sometimes is legislation and certain bills sit on a slippery slope. So we thought with 203 supporters, we were in good shape. We have just learned in the past couple of weeks that the number has moved a bit up north, if you will. And now we're hearing that we have to get 218 supporters / co-sponsors. So we are aggressively working during the summer recess to be able to get those additional 15 supporters. So that's an overview of the work that we do to push for HR 40 to be passed out of the House. Now, on the Senate side, as you know, it's a completely different landscape. And even if we got all 50 of the Democrats to come on board as co-sponsors, this is one of those pieces of legislation we need a 62-third majority vote. And we're already looking at alternatives to getting that 62-third majority vote. So it is very busy, it's very active, and it's also a very interesting time. Who am I as an individual? I grew up in the South, but not the deep South. Born and raised on the Eastern Shore of Virginia. I went to Virginia State University undergrad, and it was almost as if I was in Mississippi some days. Not uncommon to be walking to downtown Petersburg and to have the opportunity to be called some of the ethnic slurs that really don't have a place in our society, but there are those who believe that they do. I graduated Virginia State, and being loose hanging quotes, young, dumb, and stupid, I took a job working in New Jersey, and I really didn't understand other than I was, as I said, young, dumb, stupid, and probably lazy. The job was to go into New Jersey, a northern state. However, New Jersey had announced that they were not going to desegregate their state agencies, and the federal government announced that they were going to cease any federal funding to the state of New Jersey. And it became real to the state of New Jersey that the federal government was not joking, if you will. So the state of New Jersey swung into action really fast and came up with the idea that if they traveled south and they interviewed on HBCU campuses, they could hire a small team of elite recent graduates and send us out throughout New Jersey to walk into these agencies and become the desegregator, if you will. I did that for about 8 years, many amazing experiences, and a lot of them unreal because I'm in a northern state and I'm there to desegregate state agencies. So I had many experiences there, and I've had the occasion to be in Senator Cory Booker's presence, and I actually told him he stands on my shoulders. as a professional, after having left the state of New Jersey, my career has been vast. I've worked for Kaiser Permanente Healthcare as a middle manager, as a healthcare recruiter. I left that and went into the real technical field. And I worked for Lockheed Martin as a program manager for many years, where I actually retired from Lockheed Martin. And surprisingly, even at Lockheed Martin, there is that culture of often being the only one. So I have had many experiences of being loose hanging quotes, the only one. Throughout my career and throughout my life, I've always been one who fought for the underdog. About 11 years ago, I had a very, very personal tragedy, and it involved me becoming very, very actively involved with politics on a larger scale, advocating for change to the laws in the state of Maryland. So that's a little bit about who I am. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenniss. So we have some really rich experience in all of our speakers with us today. And so my first question to you each is for you to share how you define and understand reparations. So we spent the first hour of this session talking about money and class, and many people do understand reparations in financial terms, but I know just from speaking with each of you that you really have a broader definition that can be where reparations can be economic, political, cultural, and spiritual. So Ines, can you share how you define and understand reparations? And also if you can just share an example from your work as well that demonstrates however you understand it and how it's been impactful for your community.
Yeah, thanks for this question. And it's great to hear from everyone and the work that everyone's doing. For me, and from this work that we're coming from at Sogorea Land Trust, reparations is really about repair, a rebalancing, reconciliation, resources, and what we're calling a rematriation, which is kind of like a spin on repatriation. It's this idea of returning land to Indigenous women-led land work. Right, so those are some of the pieces, and for us, you know, resources and the money part is very, very important, but it's not the only piece. It's very much intertwined with what that does. It opens up access to land, which opens up access to food. Even access to prayer. People that go and need to have ceremony, for example, when someone passes away, you need 3 days of prayer outside on a land, right? How are you going to do that if you don't have access to any land in the city? So those are some of the pieces that are being built with when we're kind of trying to think about what does our communities need. And the reparations piece that we're working with right now kind of is this thing called Shibuya Land Tax. And it's an honor tax that funds our work. And the idea is, you know, we're built on stolen land and stolen people, and there's a financial legacy to that impacts us today, all of us, no matter who we are. And so this gives, it's like a tool so folks can plug in and support Indigenous-led work by recognizing that legacy, recognizing they might have a piece in it. So for example, you can go in and be like, oh, I own land, I can give back, I can maybe contribute this much. Oh, I'm just a renter. I'll contribute less to this work, or maybe I own a huge business. I need to throw down some more to this women's work. So that piece has been really important, that it's not just a donation, that it's not just charity, but that it has this like framework of that history, that it's connecting people to that, and it's recognizing it. And so it's really important if a business decides to pay Shu'umi, you know, they have to talk with their crew about it. This is what this means. We're recognizing colonization, and we actually benefited from that. And what are we going to do about that now? And so it's been really interesting to see how these conversations are coming up in a place that has so many resources, the Bay Area, and the way that's been really supportive, and the ways that you know, folks can kind of like skirt around it and not quite do it. And so the thing is like, that we can't build any kind of real justice if we're not reconciling the land and kind of like the initial wrongs of our founding. And here in the Bay Area, that is like, so it's undeniable. Like you'll have, you know, really wonderful organizations and businesses and people buying land and building, and there's ancestral remains on those lands, right? So it's not a metaphor. It's not just like something happened in the past, we should really do it. It's like, you know, the tribes that we work with are going out there and having to deal with this, right? They got to go out to the sites and see their ancestors being pulled up. And so to have this option of resources to build something else that's nurturing Indigenous people, that's building resilience and strength, both spiritually, energetically, community-wise, but also like actual resilience in the land. The natural plants are coming back. We got a hummingbird built a nest in DV's Oakland. Like those are all part of the reparations, I think, that are happening here that are really important and special. And you know, some of the other things I just want to say that have been small, obviously, some of you guys might have heard where we were fundraising to buy our first house. And, you know, we've been around for years and no one on our staff owns land. None of our local tribe owns any land. And so we just fundraised to buy our very first piece of official land. We're very excited. Gonna like kind of start to set up like a future for Indigenous people here. You know, young people actually be able to imagine, oh, I could live in the Bay Area and my kids could live here. And so let's see, those are just some of my initial thoughts. I don't want to take up too much time, but thank you for allowing me to speak about the Shibuya Land Tax and some of those efforts. And I'll just mention that those are also, you know, we've been working with lots of other tribes in other areas for similar land taxes, honor taxes, and this is a new way that folks are organizing themselves. So we have Seattle, Washington, DC, Hawaii, Albuquerque, these cities where mostly the cities don't have recognized tribes, so the tribes don't have any rights, are able to bring resources in, and everyone is able to contribute to that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ines. I love your very holistic definition of reparations and all the work that Sogorea does around land remutuation as part of that vision. Kathy, do you want to share a little bit about the work that you have led in the past and in the present in fighting for redress and reparations for Japanese American communities?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to Ines and to Kenniss because I'm learning so much about reparations just from, you know, hearing Ines right now and reading and listening to other things, and also from Kenniss and from the reparations fight for African Americans and for the legacy of slavery. Because I think our fight for redress and reparations, I don't want to belittle it, but I do want to say that it was rather limited. And my understanding was very, very shallow at the time in 1980 when we started it. It was, I don't know if I thought that deeply about it but we did have certain demands. We did have a demand for an apology from the government, you know, individual monetary compensation, a community fund to rebuild our communities, an education fund so that education could be done. And we wanted to overturn the basis of the law that had put Japanese Americans into the concentration camps during World War II. And we were able to get 3 of those things. One was the apology. Second was a token amount, $20,000 per individual. And third was a small education fund that really was reduced from the original demand. But when I look at all 3 of those things, even looking at them, you know, it's all based on legality. What was a law that was violated? Were you alive at the time? Were you in the camps? Rather than on morality, on what was and the injustice that was done to a whole group of people and what was the effect of that afterwards. So it was very narrow in that way. And I find it interesting when I think about it that the first generation, our Issei folks who were in their 60s when they got out of the camps, really had lost everything. Most of them are gone by the time the redress and reparations was passed in 1988. And for them, those that were alive, they said the apology was most meaningful because, you know, really it was past time for the money. They didn't really, they needed it earlier, you know, because they came out of the camps with nothing, $25 and a bus ticket to somewhere, you know. So they started all over again. I mean, my grandfather became, I think, a janitor. You know, my mother and my grandmother worked in a factory, which was fine, but they lost their farm, you know, in California. But the point is that to them, it meant that they were acknowledged, that the wrong was acknowledged. And, you know, but if I think about it now, if the government were really serious about understanding the wrong that had been committed, the education fund wouldn't have been something that was so meager, nor would it have been something that we would have had to do. We had to actually create the projects. This is something that the government needed to do. But so I really, you know, want to say that my eyes have been opened up by studying what reparations could be as we build our support for reparations in HR 40. So I want to really give more time to Kenniss to hear that. She's muted.
Great. Kenniss, I know you reference HR 40 a lot in your introduction, and based on the definitions of reparations that have been offered up so far about being acknowledgement of past and present harm, repair of that harm, payment financially to folks who have been harmed, and returning land to their rightful owners. Can you just very briefly tell us what HR 40 will do and what it focuses on and how it sort of fits within those frameworks and definitions of reparations that Ines and Kathy offered up for us?
Sure. What HR 40 will do, it is designed to allow for there to be a commission, and the commission will actually go out, they'll have town hall meetings, they'll meet with communities, community-based representatives from the top to the bottom, your marginalized communities, your less marginalized communities, and they will collect information from all of the interested parties. For us, reparations must become those special measures that, as the other two guests have said, will go far to repair our injuries. And what we say is it must wipe out all harm. NCOBRA has identified 5 injury areas, and reparations must wipe out the harm of those 5 injury areas. However, in addition to that, as Kathy said, it is critical that this country accepts, acknowledges, and actually apologizes for the complicity and for the inhumane treatment that they have placed upon our ancestors and pernicious history of that era up through the vestiges of this time. It cannot be a 2-line apology. It has to be something that we are satisfied with. And after that, the atonements can begin. The 5 injury areas are quickly education. We know that the educational system is separate and unequal. That must be repaired. And all the harms of these separate and unequal educational systems has to be wiped out. Healthcare is another one of the 5 injury areas. And just with COVID-19 alone, excuse me, just with COVID-19 alone, everyone sees the blatant disparities in healthcare. In Harvard University School of Medicine actually did a research project, and they said, had there been reparations, the transmission of COVID-19 would have been up to about 68% less. So that's an injury area that all the harm has to be wiped out in order for there to begin to be repaired. Criminal crime and punishment, criminal justice, we know that there are 2 justice systems. And yet again, we have to have solutions that wipe out all the harm that has been done by this dual justice system. Another one of the 5 injury areas is wealth poverty. Imagine working 256 years of forced free labor and there is no remuneration, no payment at all. So there has been no intergenerational wealth, no legacy of wealth being passed from generation to generation. And in order to close that gap, reparations is the only solution. Otherwise, the gap will continue to grow. And the last of the entry areas is peoplehood nationhood. And that involves having had our ancestors brought here. We've lost our traditions, we've lost our cultures. We're probably one of the only groups who does not have a native language. And all of that has to be repaired. So for us, it's the 4 A's: accept, acknowledge, apologize, and then the atonements. And the atonements have to wipe out all of the harm of those 5 areas of injuries. Thank you.
Thank you. We hosted a webinar earlier this week with the Grassroots Reparation Campaign, which some of you were on. And they talked about another dimension of reparations in addition to what you all mentioned, which is healing. So just curious what healing means to you all, and what healing you all feel reparations can make possible, either at the collective level or on an individual personal level. So Ines, we will start with you again.
Let's see. So thank you for this question. I think that healing is just like it's like one of the core, the glue of reparations. It's like part of the core energy of what I understand that it is. And so I think that some of the healing that comes to mind initially is just like some of the pieces around like actual access to things like abalone shells. Like, you know, that's, for example, the tribe whose land we're on uses abalone in their regalia for their ceremonies. You can't find abalone shells anymore because everyone's taken them. So as everyone learns about these things, what has been started happening is people start contacting us to return abalone shells. Right. And so this is not to say like I've been thinking about my relation with this land. I took this from the beach, you know, and I want to give it back. And so we've gotten probably about 50 shells right now in the past year or so returned back. And so this piece of this healing for me, you know, it's so special because it's like in the abalone shell that they say that you can see the whole world in the swirls, right? So it's like this piece of like, you know, something that was stolen that's given back, and that it's like, so it can, the ceremony is going to be able to take place again. Someone's going to be able to hand make that into a regalia so they can do the same. So it's like kind of like all these things building on each other. I think it's so important. It's clear to the people that have it, those things that were taken, that it's important to them too. And maybe this is an abalone shell, but you know, sometimes it's also like, you know, someone's inheritance from real estate, right? That's theirs. Their parents took it, they stole it, and now that's they have it, and they're trying to figure out, what do I do with this thing? It doesn't feel like it's mine. And so there's like this, there is a deep healing that's a part of this work. It's both individual and collective. There's people doing this, like this group doing this, like kind of like talking about this stuff, trying to figure out, let's raise our consciousness around this stuff. Let's engage this in a deeper way. Let's do a healing for our people on a historic level, right? So that's part of the healing that I see. And then, you know, on a very personal level, well, let me hear from the other folks. I know there's more questions, so we'll come back to that one. Dun, 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 dun.
All right, we are going to come back to you on that. Kathy or Kenniss, do you want to respond to this question about healing and what healing can reparations make possible?
Well, I want to say that just to share what healing did take place from reparations for our community was rather surprising at the time, because the commission, Kenniss is talking about, a commission to study the wrongs, which we had in 1981, a commission to study the wrongs that were and we thought at first, well, why do you need to study the wrongs? We know a wrong was committed, you know, but the whole thing was, and this is the beauty of it, was that because we insisted that they listen to people all over the country, hear what people have to say, and just that speaking and voicing what they had gone through, because many of the people had never spoken about their experiences or their pain or their anger in 40 years, you know, and many of us as the third generation were hearing our parents' age people speak about things, in such eloquent ways and with such emotion that we had never heard before. So it was healing for us. It was healing. It was a beginning. As someone said, we are just beginning to get out of camp now, is what they said 40 years later. So it was sort of a start to people who had held it back for so long, you know, and I think that's the same thing. I think it's healing in that way is so important. And it continues now with people taking those. We recorded the hearings and they're available now in Los Angeles hearings. And people like our friend Tracy Kato Kiriyama has taken and created a performance that is continuing to make it come alive. You know, the voices are still with us. We can hear those voices and it's still moving people. But I do think that as a third generation, I think we knew we had been impacted by what happened to our parents. We knew that, but we didn't dig into it as much as I think we could have. And I think the fourth generation is telling us, you know, they have trauma from the camps. And I think we have to listen to that and try to figure out what that is. But I think the healing is still happening. And I feel like the healing is going to continue as we learn more about reparations for Indigenous folks, you know, and for slavery and its vestiges, as Kenniss has said. And I think it'll help us to undo the myths that also I think people are suffering under, our community. The myth that somehow you have to deserve something, that you have to prove yourself. You know, and even in the fight for reparations, people said, well, we have to show that we were loyal, that, you know, somehow the loyalty was going to be convince people that we deserved it. When really there was we don't have to prove ourselves, you know, and then justice was done and it needed to be corrected. And I think we still suffer under those myths that somehow we have to be, we can be, even that we can be somehow something that we're not. And I think once we get rid of that, that pain will go away. And once we see that we really are in solidarity with others and can be part of changing the basic fundamental structure, I think that's the real healing myself.
Thank you, Kathy. Kenniss, any final words on healing?
Yes. First of all, I have been the one who has taken a strong stand that there is no healing. It just doesn't exist. And this question has forced me to do some inner soul searching. So I'm turning this whole thing around. And for me, when reparations comes, what I see will happen are several things. And if all of those things, or the majority of them, happen, then I feel that society will be a much better place. And we, the members of society, will be much better people. So I'm thinking that we have to topple this hierarchical society that this country has placed us in. And sadly, people of African descent still are at the bottom of that hierarchy, and we can't even put our hand on the bottom rung of the ladder. Healing will also be in the dismantling of the racisms that exist. And in that healing, hopefully, we will no longer have to contend with the crazy Karens who see us in the supermarket or wherever, and they call the police just because we looked at a person or we bumped into someone. And as a result of these things, there can become a level playing field. And that level playing field will become the society that we all hope to see. And with that, and especially with HR 40, I'm excited. I want HR 40 on the floor for debates, because I believe that that's where we will begin to have that racial reckoning that this country so desperately needs to have. and yes, there will be some brutal issues. There will be some harsh discussions, but we have to have those in order to be able to move forward to what potentially could become a true democracy, not just the semblance of democratic ideals. And in so doing, eventually the goal is to have good public policies. So with all of that, there becomes a sense of solidarity and unity. No one is saying you have to, every time you see me, tell me you love me, but there has to be that mutual respect. So I have to tell you, I want to thank you for putting this question at me, because when I first saw it, I actually was going to say there is no such thing as healing. So I do believe that with these things, yes, there can become healing.
Yeah, I think with so many of the harms that have been done and continue to be done, it's so easy for each of us to be disconnected from our own healing, both as individuals and as communities. Ines, I actually want to come back to you because I know that you were holding a thought on personal healing, and I think this might be the perfect time for you to share it.
Well, let's see. Actually, so I thought that you guys were going to ask us a question about our wildest dreams.
Okay, let's go there. Let's go there.
Okay, it's kind of related. So I was like, oh, dang, how am I going to do this wildest dreams one? Because, you know, the dreams get wild, right? And we do this activity sometimes where we talk about things we want to do in the past tense as a checkout. So we'll be like, oh, do you remember when we brought the salmon back? Or, oh, do you remember when, you know, the West Berkeley shell mound was returned to its tribe and things like that, you know, try to conjure it into being. So I was like, oh, what should we say? Will it be about the water? Will it be about the air? But what I wanted to share about my wildest dream is actually a personal one. And it's just a little short story, but I'll mention that I'm a violent crime survivor. I'm an assault survivor. And part of that process when you're a violent crime survivor is there is like there's a fund, right? So to recognize you've been harmed and you should, you know, we're going to help you pay for your medical stuff, all these other things. And during that time, I had an opportunity. There was a call went out from the Zapatista women, and they said, this is an indigenous group in Southern Mexico. And they said, all women in struggle, come to our land, we're having a meeting. And so I went, they sent me and a delegation down there. We went down there and I could, you know, I was walking with a cane. I could barely walk. I was very traumatized, but I really wanted to go. This is a very important opportunity. I'd done Zapatista organizing for decades. And this is the first time they're opening up their land and inviting us. And so a delegation of us went down. And one of the things that the women told us was, you know, they asked us all these questions. Hey, we heard this in America. You can't even go out on their street at nighttime because it's not safe for women. Is that true? And we talked to them, and I was fresh from this assault, you know, so it was very tender to me to hear this talk because, you know, my family had been like, don't go, it's too dangerous there, it's super dangerous. They say travel advisory, you know, and then there's all these women and they're saying, you know, we heard where you're from, it's super dangerous. And they made the announcement there, you know, since the indigenous women rose up, we have not a single woman has been assaulted or killed on Zapatista territory. And for me, that was like, that's one of my wildest dreams. To imagine what would it be like to have a place where not a single woman would be hurt or killed. Like, what is the deepness of wellness that we would have to have? What resources and care would we have to have for each other that not a single woman would have been hurt or killed in that territory since then? So that was the wildest dream I wanted to share. And thank you for asking that question.
Oh, I love that story. Kathy or Kenniss, what is your wildest dream for what reparations could achieve? Or what it may have already achieved in the case of Kathy?
Well, it has achieved a certain amount, and I think our community was transformed by the whole redress effort. You know, we changed from a community that didn't speak, that was seen as silent in a lot of ways, to a community that was, as we say, yakamashi, or noisy, and you know, and not afraid to get angry. And also we changed a community that understood our legacy of needing to speak up for others. You know, so after 9/11, our community, I was really quite surprised and also very proud that, we had a vigil soon after 9/11, and so many people came out, people that don't normally come out to things, but they came out in hundreds and continued. And I think our community sees and understands, even maybe if it's not that conscious, feels and understands the root of why we did that, why we have to do that, and that we are connected. And even when we had the Hopi Navajo, we had a fundraiser for the Hopi Navajo Nation. Again, the theater in our little Tokyo was filled, and it's like I think it's an 800-seat theater, and I was floored that many people came out so quickly. But there is a sense, I think, that we see that connection and we understand it. So my wildest dream really is just to further that education and to further those kind of ways that we are building and learning from other communities, but also building the fight for justice. But I really am excited to learn so much more from what, like Ines is saying too, because I think it speaks to all of us as a people, our need to see ourselves connected, to the earth, to each other, and our responsibility for all of that. So, I mean, it may sound a little abstract, but for me, that is really. And I think about the future because I'm a grandmother, and I'm thinking, what is the future for my grandsons? And really, it's up to all of us and them. But they're small right now, and so I get hope when I hear my other cousins' children that are like in their 20s. But it's going to take so many of us. So my wildest dream is that we all get involved.
My wildest dream is, on a personal note first, that I shouldn't be here. My wildest dream is that had this not happened to my ancestors, I would not be here. My wildest dream is that the continent would have been left intact, and that we would be living our lives, and the resources that have been perpetually removed would be on the continent. And I wonder often what my life would be like were that the case. That's not the case. So as far as reparations are concerned here, my wildest dream is that we will successfully get through this process and not have to endure 10, 20, 30, 40 more years of trying to get those crafted remedies converted into legislation and have to endure what we've done just to get HR 40 to the point that it's at right now. So my wildest dream is that we go to the commission comes back, and we sail through, and all of the remedies are signed into law, and the appropriations committee appropriates the funding, and we are able to begin to repair those harms that I talked about. So I think that's my wildest dream.
Thank you. I feel super inspired just hearing you all talk about your wildest dreams. We are almost at the end of our second hour together as a Giving Circle today. So we are going to take another break. We'll take about 10 minutes until 5:06 Pacific, and then we'll come back together as a group for some Q&A with our speakers.